Good morning. Today we'll look at Job chapters 34 through 37. That combines today and tomorrow's lessons. Tomorrow, of course, is first Sunday of the month, so we'll have Holy Communion with worship at 9 o'clock in Sutton and 10:30 and at Our Savior's McHenry, Mabel in Sutton. And Mabel in Sutton will be live on Facebook as normal, and if you're at home and wish to join us for communion, you're certainly welcome to do that with some wafers and crackers or wine or whichever you use. Today, as we look at these 4 chapters of Job, these are the final statements of Elihu to Job. And, yesterday we looked at 2 chapters where he was speaking, 32 and 33, and at the end of chapter 33, it was kind of, listen to me and I will be silent, and so there is kind of a pause built in. And so chapter 34 seems to be, again, a pause at the end. Chapter 35, a pause at the end, because 34 begins with Elihu continued and said, and chapter 35 starts with those Elihu continued, and 36 again. So it seems like there are pauses there, just that there's different statements that way, and chapters 36 and 37 are one continued conversation that he has, or one continued speech, whatever you want to call them. And chapter 34, it starts, hear my words, you wise men, and give ear to me, you who know. For the ear tests words as the palate tastes food. Let us determine among us what is good. For Job has said, I am innocent, and God has taken away my right. So, he's saying, let's try to figure this out. But, he isn't really helpful, because, he points out, who is there like Job, who drinks up like scoffing water, and who goes in the company of evildoers, walks with the wicked, so he's kind of saying, that Job is saying one thing, but he's doing another. He goes in the company of evildoers, walks in the wicked, and I think a person could read and study and try to figure this out, and still kind of have a lot of wonderings, and I do. I wonder about some of the things, in verse 11 or 13, Elihu says, who gave him charge over the earth, and who laid on him the whole world? He's talking about God here, and as in someone here had authority to give God authority. It's, I guess you got to start in chapter 10 or verse 10, far be it that God would do wickedness, and from the Almighty that he would do wrong, and for according to their deeds, he repays them. So again, he's kind of saying, Job, you're getting what you got coming, even though Job continues to profess his innocence, and if you have understanding, hear this, listen to what I say. Shall one who hates justice govern? Will you condemn one who is righteous and mighty? Who says to a king, you scoundrels and princes, you wicked men, and so he asks a lot of questions and gives us a lot to think about. And at the end of this chapter, Job speaks without knowledge. His words are without insight. Would that Job were tried to the limit because of his answers. He has rebellion, and he claps his hands in sin. So he's saying, that Job is going to be found guilty. He's insinuating that to us, is that, if Job was in a court of law, that wise men in the court of law would find Job guilty. And the last verse, he multiplies his words against God. And, he's just, Elihu is saying, Job isn't right in what he's saying. And then there's kind of a little pause or whatever, because chapter 35, and Elihu continues and said, do you think this is just? You say, I am in the right before God, so he's in many ways speaking more to Job than he is to the other 3, but he combines it to tie them all in, and I guess we do that in conversation. Sometimes you're, in a group, you might be looking more at one person and talking, or there's, several conversations going on at the same time, but sometimes we address more to one person than the whole group, and that's very true. But then he says, verse 3, if you ask, what advantage have I? How am I better off than if I had sinned? And I will answer you, and your friends with you. So look at the heavens and see and observe the clouds which are higher than you. If you have sinned, what do you accomplish against him? And he kind of points out in here, if you're righteous, what do you have to give? Your wickedness affects others, your righteousness, other human beings. And because of the multitude of oppression, people cry out. And then verse 10, he says, no one says, where is God my maker, who gives me strength in the night, who teaches, but we do cry out. And then he says that. He says they cry out, but he doesn't answer because of the pride of the evildoer. So, who is saying in some ways that, God isn't responding because of the evilness of people. In verse 13, surely God does not hear as an empty cry, nor does the Almighty regard it. How much less when you say that you do not see him, and now because his anger doesn't punish, because he doesn't greatly heed transgression, Job opens his mouth in empty talk. He multiplies words without knowledge. So again, Elihu is saying to Job, you're full of hot air. Just like Job told his friends earlier, your words aren't bringing much comfort. You're full of a lot of nonsense. And then this chapters 36 and 37, Elihu's fourth conversation here, his fourth discourse, he defends God and the divine justice. He talks about the wicked. He talks about the afflicted and how the wicked get more afflictions and how we're punished for our sins and all of that. And verse 21 of chapter 36, beware, do not turn to iniquity because of what you have been tried by affliction. See, God is exalted in his power. Who is a teacher like him? Who has prescribed him? And then in verse 24 is kind of a reminder, worship God, regard him as holy, remember to extol his works. All people have looked on it. Surely God is great. We don't know him, and he draws up water. And so then now he kind of goes into how, God is in control of nature and how God controls nature. He's the spreading of the clouds and the thundering of this pavilion, thunderstorms, lightning, covers the roots of the sea, and excuse me, gives food in abundance, but it talks about how God is. He's almost sounding like he's thinking that God is manipulating things. He lets his voice roar. It thunders his majestic voice. He says to the snow, fall on the earth, the shower of the rain, the heavy shower serves as a sign. The animals go. He's talking about God's control, but I think more God's omnipotence, God's creative abilities, and all of what God has done. Verse 14 of chapter 37, hear this, O Job, stop and consider the wondrous works of God. Do you know how God lays his command upon them? How he causes the lightnings and the clouds, balancing of the clouds, and so he's reminding all of us of God's power, of God's might, of God. In verse 22, out of the north comes golden splendor. Around God is an awesome majesty. He is great in power and justice and abundant righteousness. He will not violate. And the last thing that Elihu says, therefore mortals fear him. God does not regard any who are wise in their own conceit. So again, he's saying to Job, you're too wrapped up in yourself. You have sinned. You've done something against God. And so it's just heartbreaking to see that, and we see that in today's world too. You know that, well, what has he done wrong that this happened to him? You know, and we wonder, well, what did I do wrong that God did this, or why did God do this to me? And it's just that reminder always that God doesn't reward and punish that way. God is this God of grace, mercy, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love. And, you know, all of this stuff that's going on with Job isn't Job's fault, and it isn't put on him by God. It's the ways of the world, the ways of life. And it's, you know, I've said a couple different times that, you know, Job's book looks at suffering and the causes of suffering, but more than anything, this book is going to show to us the faith, the trust that Job has in God, and this is what we need to have for ourselves, is this utmost faith and trust in God that you know, we have done nothing so grievous that God won't forgive us, and this is a promise that nothing in all of creation can separate us from the love of God. And, you know, so God doesn't punish us that way, you know, as so many people might say, but then again, too, God doesn't prevent sickness and calamities from coming upon those who believe in him. It's the way of life, the way of the world. It's because of the brokenness of sin and the power of Satan. And Satan is helpless against God, because God is so much more than Satan could ever be.